Deputy Commissioner, we're live.
Thank you. It's 10 o'clock on the 18th of August. Welcome to the Strategic Police and Crime Board. I'm Wahid Salim, the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. We have a very full agenda as ever, and hopefully we will get through it in the required time. Apologies, we have a number of apologies today from the Police Crime Commissioner, ACC Danny Long, Chris Johnson, Matt Ward, Nicola Price, Neil Chamberlain, Sarah Marwick, and Brendan Connor may be joining us a bit later on. In terms of updates, very quickly, just I'd like to say that the Commissioner is on leave and is enjoying a hard-earned leave. We have been very, very busy over the last 5 months or so, and some of the areas that we have been doing and working on and leading on are highlighted in the report later on. So this Commission has not been absent at all. He's been at the forefront of both responding to and also leading on the recovery, both internally but also externally as well. Let's take this opportunity also to congratulate the Chief Constable on his 30 years of service to the policing family. Majority of his senior experience has been here with us in the West Midlands, and may you continue in that vein. We'll move on to the notes of the last meeting, which was on the 21st of July. The one action on in-tower analysis report and hate crime has been sent to all members, so we'll see that as closed. The next agenda item is questions from members of the public, which we have none. So I will then move directly to the first substantive agenda item, which is the economic strategy. And I'd like to welcome Brendan Warner-Southall from the office, who will do a presentation on that item. Brendan.
Thank you, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. I'll try and keep this short so that we've got enough time for questions, because I'm aware there's quite a bit of stuff on the agenda. But ultimately, what this report seeks to do is to tie a golden thread through all the reports and what we've been doing in the economic recovery space over the past few months since we have entered lockdown and started to ease out of it. It's structured in a way to provide an overview of the tiered strategy behind the work stream. So opening with the COVID context, the report gives an overview of the impact of COVID is likely to have on the economy and the knock-on effects on policing and crime. For example, we estimate that there could be between 35,000 and 45,000 people aged 18 to 24 who are likely to be made unemployed over the coming months in the West Midlands alone. This was an analysis which was done by our office. So this will ultimately have an impact on crime, and we need to be careful to know that not everyone will turn to crime that is impacted in this way, but it will. But we need to stress that it will make people more vulnerable to becoming involved in crime. So that's either as a victim or a perpetrator. So for instance, it could be a young person being more susceptible, being pressured into a county line, or a vulnerable person being more susceptible to being scammed or conned out of money, which the report does touch on. So the report then talks through the most strategic level of this work stream. And that's covered in the emergency chapter. All of the work in this space ultimately feeds up into this emergency chapter. This is our office's wide response to COVID-19 and our action plan for the next year. It's important that all of our economic strategy feeds into this so that there is oversight at the highest level of the work that we're doing in this space. Economic recovery in the COVID-19 space has a myriad of knock-on effects, and it's important that this is therefore overseen at the widest strategy within the OPCC. Thirdly, the document talks through the recovery report, and more specifically the work we're doing to feed the recovery report, which was written in June, into the wider economic recovery agenda. So the recovery report itself is a solution-focused document which covers a myriad of things which the office is currently trying to address, and the impact and interlinks between that in the economic recovery space. But ultimately, we want to ensure, in the document, we wanted to ensure that it was focused on what the office could offer to the West Midlands, and also what we needed from partners in order to be able to try and remedy the issues which are highlighted within the report. Now, the final two sections in the report to SPCB are mostly lobbying documents. So the first on this is the New Generations Deal report, which was written by the strategic advisor to the PCC. This report ultimately tries to focus on the on what needs to be done at a governmental level in order to be able to mitigate the worst impacts of COVID-19 on young people. So the things that need to be implemented in order to be able to ensure that young people aren't as economically worst hit as they could be. Now, the government has tried to do certain things to try and implement the changes in order to be able to try and stop the worst impacts of this, but ultimately they don't go far enough, and that's the key thing with this, is that when we've been pushing this report to the Welsh Government, for instance, we've seen that this has been taken up by them, and we found quite a bit of traction has been taken in those circles. Now, the final document, which was covered in this report, is the document which we've been writing in partner with Birmingham City University, which is ultimately trying to shift the agenda in terms of how we address fraud across the UK. So specifically, that is a document which is going to be published in September of this year, and has a myriad of different recommendations which need to be implemented in order to be able to address the failing national agenda on fraud. So what I've sought to do with this economic recovery report is to try and provide an overview of the different streams of work which are happening in the economic recovery space across our office. It's clear that the coming weeks and months and years even are going to be incredibly hard for the West Midlands economy, and there's a massive link between policing and crime and the economic recovery which needs to happen in order to be able to stop the worst impacts of this. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of what's happening across the office, but I'll now happy to take any questions with regards to this report.
Thank you very much, Brendan. A very comprehensive report and demonstrates the breadth of activity that we do in regards to economic recovery, but also on the wider issues around economic crime and fraud. Chief Executive wanted to come in.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner, and thank you, Brendan, for the report. Can you offer some information about what activity is underway to ensure that we maintain our connections and partnership working with the private sector and businesses during the recovery phase? What have we been doing to make sure we maintain those links and keep that partnership with business going?
So one of the main things that we've been doing is ultimately, so I suppose this comes at a number of levels, doesn't it, really? So first of all, it's about trying to ensure that we're still engaging with businesses through the different forums on the officer level. So the stuff that I've been doing to speak to organisations like the Federation of Small Businesses, still speaking to the Chamber, speaking to the School of Social Entrepreneurs, and talking through those links on a very soft interpersonal level. But then also there's certain things that need to be done in order to be able to establish wider links with the business sectors. And an example of this might be the current process that we're going through in order to be able to set up a steering group that oversees the Enterprise for Employment project. So on that, we're looking to try and get a mixture of both representatives from like social entrepreneur space, from the public sector, and then also from the private sector as well. So we've invited the Chamber to try and sit on that, We've invited the Federation of Small Businesses to try and sit on that. And then through that, we're wanting to have oversight for the work which is happening with the Enterprise for Employment scheme, and using that as a vehicle in order to be able to engage with the wider business sectors as well as the softer stuff that I mentioned earlier with regards to just speaking on a one-on-one basis with the key contacts in those different organisations. And I suppose also what's worth noting is the work that we've done to try and feed specific information which hasn't been needed to get to businesses through this period. So, for instance, with regards to the business crime agenda, all information which has come from the National Business Crime Centre has been fed to WMP, so that businesses can can better guard themselves against business crime through this lockdown period. That information has then been fed to us, and then we fed that through our mailing list and our social media in order to be able to engage with them on that agenda as well. So there's a myriad of stuff that we're doing in order to be able to try and engage with businesses in the economic recovery space, basically.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it also highlights some of the reports that we put in regards to the issues of youth employment and potentially young people, kissing their future goodbye because they're not being able to get into jobs and proper employment as well, which is an important element. Is there anybody else wants to come in on that point? Gurinder.
Thank you. Two questions. One is, so we've gone through the COVID experience and potentially second wave, and we're also seeing some increase in localized areas and the potential for impact there as well. What work has been done, not just by West Midlands Police, but are you aware of the work being done across the partnerships in terms of protecting and supporting businesses wherever possible, where there are localized outbreaks? And secondly, the last section of the report talks about response to economic crime, and I just wanted to see whether you had any kind of an update regarding action fraud. And in the past, they've had a really bad reputation in terms of their response and effectiveness, and whether that's improved at all.
Definitely. So I suppose to talk through your second point around action fraud, that is something that we are currently trying to lobby to try and change ultimately. Not to preempt the report which is going to be published in September in partnership with Birmingham City University, there are specific recommendations within that report in order to be able to try and suggest what we think needs to be done to change the response around action fraud. In short, we think that there needs to be major changes, and there has been there's been a review which is called the Mackey Review, which has found that the failings of action fraud are quite huge, and quite often the victims that report to action fraud don't go through the victims code. So there needs to be major reform there, and it feels like there is traction at a governmental level in order to be able to change the makeup of action fraud, and it feels like the traction is with us in order to be able so that what we say will be heard. In response to your first question around localized outbreaks, I don't think that that's, in terms of what WMP and the wider partners are doing in order to be able to support businesses in that space, I think that that's a conversation which is being had at CSPs and more through local authority and combined authority spaces. I know that those are conversations that are happening, but they're not necessarily ones which we're plugged into through economic through conversations around what we can do with regards to economic stimuluses and things like that. That's something that is very much being had by local authorities themselves and combined authorities, and doesn't necessarily feed into the OPCC space, because we're very much from the crime prevention kind of space. I suppose what the wider conversation that we've been having is, trying to feed information to businesses in terms of how they secure their premises to a better extent, design out crime, that kind of stuff. That's the stuff that we've been having, and not necessarily the stuff around how there's going to be less footfall in spaces because of COVID-19. that's not necessarily something that we've been massively involved with. I'm not sure if anyone wants to come in with that and add anything further.
Chief, is this a different question, or is it on this point?
It's on this point, sir. Just to note that the issue of the implementation of and repercussions arising from local lockdowns or local tightening of restrictions is part of the agenda that's being considered at the recovery forum that's convened by the combined authority, and I can feed back to members outside of the meeting content relating to the approach that would be taken if there were to be a requirement to significantly tighten the restrictions on individuals in any of those areas. I'll pick that up outside the meeting if I may, Chair.
Thank you very much. And just on the fraud agenda, it is under the direction of the Police and Crime Commissioner that we are taking a national lead on some of the issues around fraud and making a significant impact on that, to the extent where we're having conversations with Home Office officials and others around the future direction of how fraud governance, but also how fraud should be policed as well in the UK. Okay, is there any other questions anybody wants to raise? If not, thank you very much, Brendan. Just to say that as a summary, the economic climate is going to have an inevitable impact on crime. A loss of industry and jobs will unfortunately mean that more young people are lured into crime. The government needs a proper targeted jobs plan to stop an economic crisis becoming a crime wave, and crime is already returning to pre-lockdown levels, and without proper job guarantees, we risk going back to the 1980s. We are facing a ticking time bomb of youth unemployment. I'm also worried that job losses are going to have a huge impact on mental health, which is already a large part of policing demand that is set to grow further. So thank you, Brendan. We shall move on then to the next agenda item, which is safer travel. We have, I think, Chief Superintendent Claire Bell, but we don't have Chief Superintendent Claire Bell yet, but we certainly have Superintendent Dave Twyford. Chief Constable, do you want to say a few words before
No, not hugely. I mean, I think the paper speaks for itself. I think if we just go straight into Dave, I think he can talk through the bulk of it. Claire will probably add a little bit if she joins us on the safer travel, and then we'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. Superintendent Dave Twyford, do you want to come in and just give us a brief overview of the paper and any other pertinent points? Superintendent Dave Twyford, can you hear me?
Shall I start then?
I think yeah.
I'll do the paper then. So I suppose a few things really just around the paper, and then hopefully colleagues are able to join us around it. Obviously, a large section of this area of the plan relates to the critical role safer travel plays in strengthening the economic arrangements in the region, particularly by securing the safer travel arrangements that we do in coordination with West Midlands Travel, but also the work we do around our strategic roads policing areas that Dave leads on particularly. So the paper, I think, comes at a time just slightly following HMI's inspection of roads policing in the region, where the force was, I think, given a very, very strong endorsement of the work it does currently. The paper, I think, covers off the approaches we continue to take around delivering road safety and the number of interventions we've got around those. I think I'd particularly draw out on the paper the amount of work the force does around seizing uninsured vehicles. You know, literally 1 an hour are seized as part of the work we do, and particularly the work we try and do to ensure those areas are relevant. There is a considerable amount of interventions done by the road safety and harm reduction team, particularly the close pass operations around trying to improve safety around cycling that clearly we want to promote and ensure cyclists are in a safe position. That's been a scheme that's been operated and copied by many forces across the country, which is terrific. But also the work that's done around Park Safe, Zigzag, all the areas where the public can help provide information to ensure drivers are better educated or if need be prosecuted around the work we're doing. So there's some really great work, I think, done by the team. Of course, you know, that roads policing environment is changing. The paper indicates the work we're doing around the scooters pilot that's taking place in the region. And of course, a key part of our roads policing work is the crime fighting work. And I think the paper covers off well the work on Operation Wraithbane, the work we've been doing particularly around nuisance motorbikes, and also currently the work we do around Operation Hercules, which is on car cruises. Final area is the work that we do around safe travel. There's quite a considerable amount of work, I think, detailed in the paper around the work we do ensuring the transport network is suitable and operating in a safe way. That's been particularly relevant with the work the team's done during COVID to ensure face mask coverings are worn to make sure the transportation is safe, and that's been very effective. And I'll probably kind of stop there, and we'll take any questions around it. It's quite a wide-ranging paper covering everything from what the team are currently doing, as well as new developments around HS2 and other areas. So Dave has now joined us, but we'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Superintendent Dave Twyford, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
You can, yeah. Just checking comms. That's great. Okay. Well, the Chief Constable stepped in admirably in your stead, so we'll go straight to questions. Tom, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. It's clear from the report that there's loads and loads of great work going on, and that roads policing is taken really seriously. So I'll start off with that positive. Some members of the public have been in touch with me, and I've seen it with my own eyes, with a real concern over speeding on local roads, 20 miles per hour roads, sometimes higher, but there is a bit of a problem, and I've seen it myself. So could you talk us through what you think local groups can do about that and how they can be supported by West Midlands Police to kind of stamp this out?
Of course, yes. Just confirm my comms okay, you can hear me? Great stuff. Okay, if I start by saying, so speeding is predominantly led for us and our campaigns to our road harm prevention team, which does, as Mr. Thompson said, the zigzag work, etc., etc. And to reach out and build capability across the broader West Midlands, we work with every MPU. And part of that key work is around Speedwatch. So what we do, we use the analysis which was born out from the HMIC inspection. Actually, we look at those areas of key concern. We link in with the local neighbourhood teams. And where there are areas that are highlighted to us, we'll work with the community through a Speedwatch initiative, or work directly with MPUs or partners in those specific areas of concern. So although it's centred around a small team here over at Perry Bar, we then reach out across the broader West Midlands through each MPU, and then in terms of the community for Speedwatch activity.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Jonathan.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. My questions are two questions. They relate to the recent HMIC report on roads policing, which is, I think, demonstrates the importance of this area of business and the changes to the national, excuse the pun, direction of travel in relation to this area of business. And many of the recommendations are very much at a kind of strategic level about resources and the statutory framework and the expectations on a number of agencies, including policing, in relation to roads and road safety and roads policing. However, there are two areas in the recommendations that are quite specific and quite operational, and it's those to which I address the questions. So the first is one of the recommendations talked about the use of what's called Operation Snap, the use of video footage from the public as part of a force's approach to road safety and enforcement on the roads. And it's just get an update really on whether this is in use in West Mids and what our thinking is in relation to its future use. And the second is around the accreditation of collision investigators, that it talks about professionalising investigation programme, the PIP programme, and setting standards for collision investigation and collision investigators. Can you offer an update on what accreditation the collision investigators in CMPG and in roads policing in the West Midlands have, please?
Yes, of course, thank you. So in relation to the first one, which is ultimately the use of dashcam footage, yes, we have a system in place. It's slightly different to Operation Snap, which is a broader system used by a few forces. And we seek to understand and gain best evidence through evidential statements from colleagues. Hopefully I haven't lost you. Can you still hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Yes, we can still hear you.
Excellent, thank you. So yes, we do have a system. We have a slightly different system to the one that Met runs, which is OpSnap, and therefore it's more of a filtered system. We look to seek the best evidence to either look to change behavioural prosecution. So that is in train. I am due for a conversation, as you say, Mr. Jardine. It was a national recommendation from the report. I'm due for a conversation with colleagues in the Met and also ACC's Steve Barry around the broader difference between OpSnap and ours, and if there's anything we can learn from that. So that's probably in train. And if you'll leave that with me, and I'm aware there's a round table that yourselves are hosting in early September, and I'll bring an update to that. And in relation to the Clint's investigation one, I'm really pleased the recommendations there, because it's one thing I found frustrating. You know, we deal with some very, very serious collisions in our world. And albeit we have seen a reduction again this year, we've still had 44 people die on our roads in the last 12 months. And there is a difference in terms of accreditation, and we have asked formally via the national work around some steer from the College of Police, you know, what is the best level of accreditation and otherwise that we can use. So I'm waiting for that clarity from the College of Policing, and once I have that, I'll be in a better position to update you further. And again, I'll bring an update to the roundtable in September.
Thank you very much. Chief Executive, do you want to come back in? No? Okay, that's great. Thank you, Superintendent Day. I have Gurinder and then Kath. Gurinder.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the client figures for under the section on safer travel on bus transport. And it says there's been well, total bus crime has increased 2% over the year to year. And I'm not sure whether any of that period coincided with the COVID period, so when actually there was very little usage of bus transport, and so whether that is that if it had been like for like, it would have indicated a bigger increase. I'm just wondering, and some of those figures in terms of the breakdown, for example, 11% reduction in robbery and reduction in criminal damage and theft from person are quite big reduction, but then there are equally big increase in common assault 33% and public order 8%. There are some really big increases there as well. I'm wondering what the force is doing to address that, to make sure that those figures can be brought down further.
Okay, so I see that Claire hasn't quite landed. She has phoned me saying she had difficulties coming in. I suppose although it's not my area of business, what I have found is my work with the regional sort of recovery group around transport is the clear and targeted approach to the tasking process in safer travel. So of course we've had 3 months the last financial year, or 2 months last financial year, with challenges around obviously the COVID and the recording processes, etc. So it's probably one where we don't fully understand that. But what I can say quite honestly and openly is that there's a really good tasking process, you know, where and some of the reduction around robbery certainly are due to the work around safer travel with partners and police, obviously a dedicated resource, and that's supported by the OPCC. And I think, and I'm quite reassured by that. I think that going forward, that continues. I think there's clearly the ongoing challenges around COVID and face mask, which again, the team have done a great job on in terms of that broader education piece. But I think in terms of the common assault bit, I probably can't answer that question in terms of data and figures. And I'll certainly come back to you on from after speaking to the Safer Travel team. But again, I reiterate, there's a really robust tasking process with police and partners through the Savile Travel Partnership.
Okay, Chief Superintendent Claire Bell has joined us. Did you want to come in? Okay, we can't hear you.
Wahid, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Chief Superintendent.
I think I can answer Gurinder's question if that's okay. So apologies, we seem to be having a little bit of comms issues. But in terms of the time period over which the data is provided, so this is April 2019 to March 2020, so very little impact over the COVID reductions. But actually over that period of time, we actually saw an 8 million passenger increase. So the volume of people on the network has actually increased over the measured period of time against the previous year. The previous year when we came and reported before this board, we'd actually seen some concerning increases in crime. So we saw a 28% increase in robbery, 14% increase in sexual offences, obviously really concerning. great to see that those are now under control and actually seen some reductions over the last 12 months. But in respect of the common assaults that we've seen, a lot of those are actually offences against the bus drivers themselves. So we're very keen, it started about 12 months ago, we're very keen to push the spit kits, which have been used to capture DNA evidence of offenders. So we've been socialising that with bus drivers, educating them and teaching them how to use those kits over the last 12 months. And that's actually resulted in increased confidence and more complaints, whereas ordinarily they would have perhaps just ignored the offence and carried on about their work. Now they're actually reporting it, they're gathering evidence, and that's allowing us to identify offenders and deal with them positively as a result.
Thank you very much for that response. Okay, if Grinda does want to come back in, I'll move to Kath. Your question, Kath.
Yes, good morning. It's a question for Superintendent Twyford. Dave, could you explain the support that's been offered to the families where we've had those 42 fatalities?
Yes, of course. So we are the only roads policing function in England that has a dedicated family liaison officer unit. And we have been able to both, not for people that are tragically killed on the road, so the 44 families, a variety of others whose families or loved ones have been seriously injured. And what happens is we immediately allocate a dedicated family liaison officer, make contact with them at an appropriate time, relatively early on. And I suppose I stress every case is different to understand their needs. And it's a process of, I think, being able to explain, that this family have been sort of all of a sudden taken into this tragedy, and it is trying to help them and hold their hand moving forward, really. So yes, we explain what we know and being really open and honest about what's happened. We explain the challenging processes that we're going to go through, whether that's a really unfortunate collision or something more serious where there's been a non-stop fatality, which is really, really difficult. And then we stay with them throughout the whole of the criminal justice process, and importantly, we stay with them for as long as they need, and sometimes it's longer with others. We've had some. It's a really touching subject, really, and we've always seek to strive and learn with them. And one of the things that I know the FGC and Chief Officers of West Mids have supported recently is it's a thing called memory boxes. And one of the most challenging things we have to do is when we deal with fatalities of young children. And it's the aftermath of that where we need to return property and things to parents, and we now do that in a way which is compassionate and in a way that's supported by our colleagues such as Brave or road safety charities, to do that in a way that sort of tries to not make things worse. It's a really tricky thing to do. My colleagues are amazing that do that, and it's recognised in the report around we need to continue to look after their welfare. But I think one thing I'm pleased about, and I represent a charity every year, is that we give them and provide for them whatever they need, bespoke to their own requirements, to support them through the tragedy that they've suddenly found themselves within.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I bring Grinda back in, just like to welcome Anne Shaw from Transport for West Midlands. Welcome to our Strategic Police Crime Board. And it's quite timely you've come in at this point, because I have a question about the Regional Control Centre. So we have the CMPG Regional Operations Centre, and I understand the West Midlands Combined Authority through Transport West Midlands has the Regional Control Centre being set up in Simmer Lane. Could you just explain how the two operations talk to each other, and are there any plans of working with us around integrating that regional control centre so that it becomes, and with local authorities, so it does become a centre where all traffic management is developed through and managed? I know this was one of the key recommendations from the Commissioner's public inquiry on the M6 issue.
Okay, yeah, so just to confirm, then the Regional Transport Coordination Centre opened its doors earlier this year. It's a collaboration between not just traffic, but also public transport operators as well. We're working across the 7 local authorities in terms of how we're supporting and managing traffic flows, as well as how we're getting people moving around the public transport system as well. Our main aims is to manage congestion, and it was originally set up to support the delivery of major infrastructure projects such as HS2. What we've got is a connection through the control centres, all the different control centres that we have around the region, both for traffic and public transport, visibility of how the wider transport system is working. In terms of our relationship with West Midlands Police, we've already carried out a number of operations. So we were testing our systems in December last year when we had the rail strike, and with the support of Superintendent Twyford's motorbike team, we were able to also manage some of the sort of severe traffic congestion that we had associated as people were driving during the Christmas period, particularly into Birmingham city centre, which was causing delays to our bus network as well as clogging up the road network as well. So we have those operational relationships working with the police. But also we're also investing as part of the Regional Transport Coordination Centre into our highways infrastructure. So we've been supporting the deployment of more ANPR cameras for West Midlands Police as well. So obviously West Midlands Police can use those for all of their policing operations, but we're also, through the appropriate data sharing arrangements, receiving some of that data back to us in an anonymised way, which is helping us to understand traffic flows in particular, not just the numbers of vehicles, but the types of vehicles as well. So we're working on those better relationships, which then helps us to sort of see in real time how the network is performing, but also build the data so that we can model some of the other activities that we deal with, whether it's construction, planned works, as well as being able to sort of spot major incidents and the impact on the wider transport networks as well. And then through the relationships of the various agencies that we work across, we're managing incidents in real time, where we're able to sort of give people advance notice of things, and hopefully they don't arrive within that congestion, or suggesting alternative routes or modes for them to travel as well. So we also, as part of the RTCC, we have broader communications with the public, the travelling public and businesses, so that we're able to sort of pass that information during incidents, and also prepare for some of those planned proposals as well.
Right, thank you very much, and that's a really helpful and very important partnership arrangement working. And just confirm one last question before I move on. So, if there was a major incident on the M6, like there was a couple of years ago, is the RTCC able to control the traffic flows into the other minor roads and arterial roads around the motorway, so you can get traffic flowing much more quickly? And do you have like control over the traffic light systems in other local authorities?
Yeah, so we have visibility of the UTCs within the local authorities as well. So through our real-time monitoring of the network, if we have an incident on the motorway, we can see how that then impacts on the wider local road network. And the relationships that we have, it's a coordination centre. So at this point in time, we don't have automated control within the RTCC. We work with the relevant urban traffic control centre to alert them to those problems, and continue to liaise with them whilst those incidents are ongoing, so that they can manage and control that network as well. What we've got is visibility, so all the CCTV cameras that we have out on the traffic network feed into the RTCC, including with Highways England as well. So we're able to give that visibility back to the local authority so they can see broader than their own network. And then together we manage the road network through those incidents, so we can avoid people getting caught up in that traffic congestion, or we can sort of amend traffic signals remotely, so that we can sort of keep traffic flowing through some of those locations.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that. Gurinder, this is the last question before we move on. So Gurinder.
Yeah, I wanted to come back on the bus crime. So the figures for the spitting offences, clearly, he says 30% of the common assaults were spitting incidents, with the majority being against bus drivers. And you've also identified that 50% of incidents you've been able to collect DNA evidence, and 31% of those offenders have been identified. Have you got any figures about outcomes in relation to those cases where people have been identified? And do you also, because I think I'm correct in that there's a large proportion of bus drivers are Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. So do you consider hate crime as a motive and as an aggravating factor in these cases when they happen? And you know, because these are quite horrific crimes, and you know, these are key workers we're talking about, that they were vital to the effort of getting other key workers to work during the COVID shutdown. So you know, we need to be on top of this.
Thank you. Chief Inspector Gareth, do you want to come in? I was going to go to Chief Superintendent Claire Bell. I'm not sure if the communications work. Do you want to try, Claire?
Yeah, hopefully. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah. Okay.
Oh, wow. Thank you. My apologies for earlier. I'll just offer a few words and then Gareth can come in if there's anything further. I think some of the points made in the question are really, really valid. Of course, one of the positives of the fact that we're seeing an increase in reporting of the spitting is because of the confidence that's being built with the bus drivers themselves. So this is an initiative between West Midlands Police, the crime team, and National Express. So I think that one of the reasons that we're having these reported is because the bus drivers do know that they're taken seriously, and the provision of the spit pack so that people can gather the evidence quickly. Some of the data that you've asked for around the ethnicity of the bus drivers, the amount of hate crime that might cross over with that where it's aggravated, and also the outcome rates. We haven't got that breakdown of detail here today, but if that's something that is of interest, then we can certainly dig deeper into some of that information and bring that back, because there is still only small numbers of information on that, but that's something that we can come back with. Obviously, the initiative will continue and we'll understand more. If it is a racially aggravated offence or a hate crime, then obviously it would be classified as such. We just haven't got that breakdown available at the moment. Gareth, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add.
Just other than say, you know, particularly during the COVID period, there have been some high-profile cases which have been in the local newspapers. People have been sent to jail for spitting at bus drivers. So we certainly do everything we can to make sure there's a positive outcome. And like you say, if we need to produce some figures on that, we'll happily do so.
Great, yeah, if you could, that'd be really helpful. On that point, thank you all for the stellar cast of officers and for coming in for this agenda item. A very important issue that the Commissioner has made as a priority for his police and crime plan. I'd just like to summarise by saying I'm very pleased that we are cracking down on uninsured drivers and will continue to do so. We are getting more uninsured vehicles off the roads. Uninsured drivers are a menace to other road users and a danger to themselves. We have made targeting these dangerous individuals a real priority. That's why we are seizing a vehicle on average once an hour, all day, every day. That's over 10,000 this year. We have seized over £26 million in drugs, cash and other assets from the region's criminals on our roads. Unlike other forces in the country, we continue to invest in road policing. This means that our roads are not and never will be safe spaces for region criminals. We are catching more speeding drivers and in doing so encouraging everyone to go slower. This is already seeing a positive results with average speeds down on routes where safety cameras have been installed and fewer deaths across the region. We are working closely with backcountry councils to get cameras up and running following the success in Birmingham and Coventry. Just to be clear though, the police does not profit from these cameras. Money from fines goes to central government and money raised from courses goes to maintaining the cameras. And unfortunately, it seems the Home Office and government are take the mantra of money, money, money to them rather than distributing the money and showing the love to policing where actually we are doing most of the work. So on that point, thank you all. You are welcome to stay, or I'm sure you may have other more pressing issues to deal with. So thank you for your time. And on that point, I will move on to the next agenda item, which is the emergency chapter, and I invite Jonathan Jardine, the Chief Executive, to present this paper. Well, I would. Oh, there you go.
Eric. Hello, sir. Thank you very much for that. So this report is an update report. It's by exception. It doesn't seek to capture all of our activity in relation to recommendations 3 and 4 in the emergency chapter. So just to remind board members and people tuning in for the meeting, the emergency chapter was agreed back in April in order to ensure that the OPCC maintained its statutory functions throughout the crisis period. And recommendations 3 and 4, to which this report refers, basically cover 2 areas. One about the role of the Commissioner in leading and supporting the partnership response to the crisis, both in the initial phase and now in the recovery phase. But also recommendation 4 is about, objective 4 rather, is about continuing the operations of the OPCC during the crisis period and beyond. So essentially it talks about how does the OPCC continue to work, and what role can the OPCC play in ensuring there was an effective response and a recovery. So as I say, it doesn't cover everything that the office does. So therefore, things like the work of internal audit and custody visiting and appropriate adult schemes all been maintained during the crisis period. But it doesn't also go into detail about some of the areas of partnership working, though it does refer to them in relation to community safety partnerships, the local criminal justice board, the violence reduction unit, all of which have maintained their activity over the last few months. It highlights one of the issues that's not directly related to the COVID emergency, but during that crisis period, for partially connected reasons in some ways, that the issues relating to confidence in policing, disproportionality, racism, and broader issues around inequality and how these both were played out and magnified perhaps by the pandemic became an issue. And thus the report gives a summary of what has become a very broad programme of activity launched again just a few weeks ago that sets out how we are approaching this broad agenda around ensuring that policing has the confidence of the wider public, that it addresses issues relating to inequality and disproportionality as they present both in policing as an organisation, but across the wider criminal justice system too. And we'll be reporting back to board on regularly over each quarter over the coming months to ensure that we provide an update on how that work is progressing. The report talks about the activity we've done to maintain services for victims of crime. This was a critical issue because many of the services relied on face-to-face contact, for example, which simply couldn't be maintained for many categories of victims during the crisis period. The report sets out in some detail how we have allocated some short-term funding received by the MOJ. The purpose of that funding was not to provide new services. It was not a commissioning exercise for services. It was about preserving and maintaining the provision of victim services across a range of providers, some of which we were funding directly already, and others that were providing services separately from the OPCC, and how we maintain them, their services, giving them the funding to support the purchase of laptops and remote working equipment, and as well as personal protective equipment as well. The frustration there, though, this was a very short-term approach from the MOJ. It doesn't set out how, for many of our victim services, they're expecting a surge in demand as lockdown increasingly lessens, particularly in relation to domestic abuse and other related offences. I won't talk in detail about the work of the Enterprise for Employment, and I hope that Brendan Warner-Southwell is still on the line. So if there are questions about that, we can address those. But this is a really interesting and key piece of work because it both shows that we are maintaining the services of the OPCC, continuing with our agenda around prevention and supporting young people away from criminality, but also reflects our activity to ensure that the economy recovers as quickly as possible as well. And then lastly, I would highlight the diversionary work that's set out in there. Again, it shows that we are continuing with our activity and our work, even despite the restrictions imposed by the crisis and the implications of that, but also seeks to rejuvenate and really give new emphasis to our activity in order to support those who perhaps are at the very early stages of getting involved in criminal activity or are in that pre-criminal phase, and make sure that their services are there to, rather than criminalise young people, which comes with many risks of actually worsening the problem, I think, if we're honest, rather than addressing it, but finding ways to divert people away from criminal activity. And there's the section in the report that talks about that I would highlight. Happy to take questions, of course, Chair, but that's the report setting out how we've responded to the crisis and addressed the issues in the emergency chapter.
Thank you very much, Chief Executive. I'm really pleased that we're putting these reports every month, giving an update on the breadth of activity that the office is doing in response to COVID, but also continuing the activity that and the objectives that were set out in the Police and Crime Plan. David Jameson, as the Police and Crime Commissioner, was the first Police and Crime Commissioner to have published an emergency chapter setting out very clearly how we're going to respond to that emergency. Those individuals out there who have been questioning what we're doing, I would urge them to read our reports, which are all available online, to show the great activity, the leadership that the Police and Crime Commissioner has shown here in the West Midlands, that is seen nationally as a great example as well. I understand a lot of other PCCs across the country followed suit and published an emergency chapter in their Police and Crime Plan as well. I look to welcome the Minister of Policing, I'm sure in a couple of months' time, to show the work that we do here in the West Midlands and the leadership that we take, not just in policing, but also across the board with a partnership working and a wider economic agenda as well. I'll invite questions if there's any from members. And no, okay, well, that was a very comprehensive report, Chief Executive. Thank you. The Enterprise for Employment scheme is going to be a very important project, and it shows the work that we can do to support the economic recovery of the region, but also ensure that we break that cycle of crime for individuals who have been through the criminal justice system as well. And I look forward to having an update on that very soon. And the disproportionality work is also a very important work. Again, a very clear commitment by the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable to address those specific issues and the real challenges that we are facing as a society, but also within policing as well. Again, a great leadership in that vein as well. And we'll be providing an update on that work in the next couple of months. Okay, on that point, I'll then move on to the next agenda item, which is the forces update on the emergency chapter. I welcome ACC Jane Meir. Should I go straight to Jane Meir? Or, yeah, ACC Jane Meir, would you like to highlight some of the key issues from the paper, please?
Yes, I will do. Obviously, this has been reported in each month by exception, so I'll keep it relatively brief. We're not seeing any significant changes to the expected patterns of crime that we've reported previously. Demand has certainly risen to sort of normal summer levels. We do have some areas of crime that are remaining low. Burglary, for example, because of more people being at home, has seen continued reductions. However, we do see an increase in violent offences, particularly in relation to domestic abuse, and we've had an increase in the region of 20% year to date so far. We've also seen the continuation of including unlicensed music events, and often these are involving our younger people. And we've had over through the force since the 1st of May. Sorry, you're struggling to hear me, Wahid?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, you're breaking in and out. I hope this, yeah, did you just want to?
I'll just turn off my camera, see if that helps.
Okay, yeah.
So in relation to our unlicensed events and large gatherings, we've had over 3,000 being reported since the 1st of May. We've put a significant policing operation in place over the summer to deter and disrupt these events, and that will continue. We are aware that the government has intentions to increase our powers in this area following feedback from the National Police Chiefs Council. You've heard from Safer Travel in relation to their activity, but certainly after an initial reduction in things like directions to leave, we have seen an increase since the mandatory need for face coverings, particularly in the transport arena. And they've had a requirement to issue about 900 directions to leave. However, as we've seen previously, compliance has been pretty good, with only 3 fixed penalty notices being required and only 1 arrest being necessary. In relation to the retail sector, this has been largely managed by businesses themselves in terms of an expectation on the community to wear coverings as they enter shop premises. Just moving on in relation to the wider issue of PPE, the force continues to have good levels of stock, and we have now issued face coverings to all frontline officers and staff who are in roles where they're likely to have to go into premises and the transport network. We've recently received further guidance in relation to the use and wearing of PPE by our staff, which we are reviewing. This is where staff can't maintain social distancing, particularly in areas like vehicles, and it is likely that we will review our guidance for officers in the next few days or week. You will be aware through media reporting that we've managed an outbreak affecting Oldbury custody. It wasn't within the reporting period of this particular paper, but I think it's worthy of note. It only related to 3 positive cases, but did result in almost 50 officers and staff needing to self-isolate just due to the dynamic nature of the custody environment and the way that those teams need to support one another with officers working overtime. We were commended by Public Health England for how we managed that event. And how we were able to sort of trace our staff and ensure isolation. However, it's not without consequence, particularly an area like custody is critical for our operational delivery, and it has been quite a logistical exercise to ensure that our blocks have remained open. What we've been able to do during this time is draw on additional staff from outside of the normal custody environment. And we've been able to keep the majority of custody sites open during this period. What we have then been able to do is get support from other forces as a contingency at critical times. There is an additional factor which you'll be aware of, Deputy Commissioner, which relates to the video-enabled justice, and obviously the requirement to support that adds extra pressure on our custody estate. Fortunately, the self-isolation period has now ended, or certainly ending over the next day or so, and as such we should get back to normal business. And our neighbourhood policing colleagues are also supporting the local authority and partners within Sandwell to support their local outbreak management work. Just in relation to where we are with our current abstractions, approximately 5.2% of the force are abstracted currently, with 429 sick and 373 self-isolating. This is manageable for us, but obviously with annual leave and the demands on the force during the summer period, we are focused very much on where our resources are and making sure they're in the right place. But certainly this is significantly reduced since the beginning of the outbreak. The paper also references where we are financially, and the detail is there, and the Home Office have now confirmed that they will be reimbursing in relation to medical grade PPE, which is a significant help. We will also be in a position now to start getting further income in relation to resourcing at Birmingham Airport. It is at a lower level than previously, but it is now starting to return as the airport is open. I'll pause there. I think the broader sort of points within the paper are self-explanatory, but I'm happy to take any questions, and apologies for the technology.
That's not a problem. Thank you very much for that comprehensive overview, ACC Mayor. I have Jonathan Jardine first, and then Kath. Jonathan.
Thanks, Deputy Commissioner. Just two questions, Jane, if I might. First of all, relating to enforcement of track and trace, and they both relate in a sense to the announcement around the self-isolation requirements for people travelling back from France and other places. Are there any issues arriving for the force around relation to the requirement for individuals to self-isolate? Is the force involved in any enforcement activity in relation to the self-isolation requirements, and what are the implications of that? And also, has the force's own workforce planning been affected by an increased number of people being required to self-isolate on return from holidays in France and elsewhere?
So if I touch on the first point, yes, we do have a role in relation to those who may be coming back from holiday and being asked to quarantine. We've managed that within our force support units, and what they are able to do is they are able to visit individuals when they've been asked to by Public Health England during their sort of normal course of business. So it hasn't created significant demands on us. But what I'm looking at the moment is I'm just trying to find the figures. We were getting roughly 5 a week in relation to those inquiries. That has started to increase, obviously, as more quarantining has been expected, and also because of the sort of swift nature in which those quarantine requirements are being put in place. In terms of our role, it is very much about supporting Public Health England in terms of, and the border sort of force in doing checks where individuals there are concerns about them being at home, but it is not causing us significant concerns at this stage, but we are monitoring the details. In terms of our own staff, it has been a very uncertain time for staff, and we have had to review our policy on a couple of occasions. What we're fortunate in is that we are, where we can, allowing staff to work from home if they are unfortunately caught up in a last minute requirement for quarantining. We are, however, asking staff to work with their line managers to be sensible about their choices. And I think initially we certainly had a view that if officers had already booked a holiday prior to the 23rd of March, and it could now no longer be cancelled, and they couldn't change it, and they chose to go, and then for some reason they needed to quarantine, we would work with them to make sure that they weren't sort of out of pocket, as it were, in terms of their annual leave. However, anyone who has chosen to book holiday since restrictions were imposed, knowing that there may be a risk of requirement to take additional leave, we've asked them to work with us as a force to, if they can work from home meaningfully, then we will facilitate that where we can. But there is also an expectation that they may use some of the leave themselves. And that is worked on a case-by-case basis, pretty much with line managers, trying to be as pragmatic and as supportive as, to staff as we can, but ultimately recognising that we need to be delivering a service to the public and maintaining our resourcing levels. Is there any further queries on that?
That's great. Thank you, ACC Mayor. That's a very comprehensive response. Before I go to Kath, can I just point out the bonus allowance, ACC Mayor? This is again a first by this Police and Crime Commissioner who implemented. I'm very pleased. 140 special constables have claimed that bonus allowance. How many 140 of how many special constables?
If I'm honest, I don't know our total number of special constables that would have been eligible for this, but I don't know whether Vanessa Jardine or the Chief Constable would know that detail.
Sorry, I know.
I think we'd have to come back on that. I think of our numbers, we're not sure who's eligible, and we could just do an update on our total numbers because we've recruited some recently.
Okay, that's cool. It's just highlight that this 140 is still quite a large number in the scheme of things, which is really good, and also demonstrates the great work that the special constables have been doing, all for free. I might add, just to point out, and I know you've highlighted a number of individual cases on Twitter as well about special constables going above and beyond and really giving a significant amount of their time protecting the public. I'll move to Kath Hannon then. Kath. Kath, you're on mute.
Good morning, Jane. Thank you. My question is about organisational learning. There's a reference there to some examples which are quite strategic. Would you be able to give us an insight into any changes that have been made to policy or procedure, or anything that's enhanced the relationship with the public?
So, Kath, what we were able to do during this period was obviously ensure that our digital offer to the community was in line with the COVID-19 restrictions. And actually, I think the opportunity that we've been able to continue investigating crime, but being able to do it remotely has benefited both the organisation itself, but also members of the public. And we've had good feedback from them in terms of opportunities around electronic statements, being able to engage with the force in a virtual way, whether that be through video conferencing, through emails or over the phone. What we have tried to do is minimise our physical contact with the community in line with the restrictions, and make sure that we are doing it one sort of in a minimal way, but two, for our more serious incidents and where we can do things online, we have done. Obviously, you'll be aware of significant progress with enforced contact, with the various different opportunities for the public to get in contact with us, including obviously live chat, which we saw sort of significant use of during this period. But in relation to our sort of additional learning, what we've also been able to do is work with partners such as solicitors by enabling them to virtually make contact with individuals who are in custody, but also, as I've mentioned before, in relation to video-enabled justice, be able to actually manage remand hearings from the custody estate. All of those things are not only making things, I would argue, more efficient, but they are also actually better for members of the public. And although offenders in custody may not always be our community's number one priority, having seen that opportunity in action, it demonstrates that we treat people with much more dignity and respect by not moving them around the criminal justice estate during court processes and leaving them in one place. And there has been positive feedback in relation to how people in custody are being treated and how they feel. A lot of it's anecdote at this stage, I would suggest, in terms of the feedback that officers have been receiving. And one of the things we're looking to do through our customer satisfaction work is to understand how satisfied the public have been during this period, and how some of these changes will have impacted on that satisfaction.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Kath. Is there any other questions anybody wants to raise? No, thank you, AC Mayor, for that very comprehensive overview. I just like to just say about the illegal gatherings, the raves and street parties. I have made a number of statements over the last couple of weeks about this, and I'm very pleased to note that the government has listened to policing and have indicated that they will be introducing the fine of £10,000 for those who organise such illegal raves. I do hope the government will bring forward very quickly this power, because although they have indicated, I understand we still don't have that power to issue those fines. These are irresponsible gatherings, and I understand a lot of young people want to look for a place to go during the summer, but these street parties and raves isn't that place to be going. The coronavirus is still very much out there, and these events can potentially spread the coronavirus around. And unfortunately, in some of the cases we have seen criminal activity happening as well, in some of the events being organized specifically by criminal groups to disseminate their drugs. So I would urge members of the public and young people to consider before they go to these raves and not to attend these illegal raves and gatherings. Also like to note the Safer Travel team and the work that they have done. I know we had that earlier, and 800 people have been removed from public transport who haven't been wearing face coverings. It is important, there's a reason why face coverings have been asked of those who travel on public transport. It is to keep people safe. So I hope people will stop and make sure that they follow that regulation as well. Okay, on that point, I will then move on. Thank you everyone for your input into that agenda item. I'll move to the procurement strategy, and I understand Lee Jones is here with us. Lee, are you here? I can see two of him, but not, unfortunately, I can't hear him. Chief Constable, would you like to take the report? You're on mute.
Yeah, I'll cover this one. Hopefully Lee can answer the details, because he's definitely going to be further ahead in terms of me. So I think, I suppose the key areas here, we've developed a joint procurement strategy together with the Police and Crime Commissioner, who is the contracting body for most of the issues for the force. So the force will identify policing needs, but the PCC is actually the legal entity we contract through. And there are a number of issues that we want to deliver through the joint procurement strategy, which are clearly, first of all, obtaining value for money for what is precious public money. And the team, I think, have operated against savings targets. There has been a general level of savings target collection as part of policing nationally, as part of the efficiency work we do. And as the paper shows, not just the level of savings that's been delivered by Lee and the team, but actually the level of contribution we've made to the national figures that have actually been quite pivotal, I think, in policing, ensuring it can set out a clear settlement of its approach to efficiency. I would have thought these issues will continue to be important as we go forward into the spending review, and particularly a strong emphasis on procurement, because the formation now of Blue Light, which is the police procurement company, which is going to be based here at West Midlands Police Headquarters, actually, it's very important we continue to work closely with the work that's taking place. The paper also identifies the work we do about income generation. That's a slightly more uncertain world at the moment. We have already discussed this morning the pressures on income that we receive for policing services, particularly at the airport, which clearly we've reduced the policing presence considerably because of the lower demands on the airport, but also events like football. But it does show, I think, the work that we've already done in terms of things like work with our universities, some of the work we're doing through collaboration arrangements. And it is certainly the intention of the force this year to expand opportunities to look at where it can provide services to other forces. The work we're doing with Warwickshire, I think, is really important, and is a good pathfinder for this, but it is a pathfinder to see if there are other areas where the considerable advancements the force has made in its back office or business services can actually be commercialised for the benefit of other parts of policing, really. I think there are a number of specific issues about how contractual assessment is done through a period of time, which I confess Lee is far better qualified to talk through for me. And I'll kind of pause there. There is quite a lot in the paper about the social value work that we've done as regards the joint procurement strategy, and of course a copy of that's attached. Hopefully Lee's with us now, but if not, I'll try and answer any questions you've got.
Thank you very much. I'll just check. Lee, can you hear us?
Can you hear me, Chair?
I can hear you now. Excellent. So we can hear you. Great. So the Chief Constable stepped in as the Chief Constable normally does, cover the report. So we'll go straight into questions then in that case. So I think Mark wanted to come in first, and then I'll bring in Tom. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Lee, I've just got some quite specific questions about social value. In the report, in paragraph 45, you talk about the social value assessment through the portal applies to appropriate contracts. I just wondering whether you could clarify what appropriate contracts are. And the second part of my question relating to social value is around whether there's any consideration to actually increasing the 10% of the assessment to be increasing it more for social value. Thank you.
Of course, Mark, and just to put on record my profuse apologies for the technical snafu. Then I was talking away, thinking that I was clear, but clearly was on mute. Like others, unfortunately, I've had some difficulties in getting Zoom to play nicely with my my laptop this morning, so I've gone the old-fashioned way and dialed in, and still experiencing some problems. So, thank you, Chief, for stepping into the breach, as it were. Yeah, of course, Mark, happy to take those questions. When we talk about appropriate contracts that the social value evaluation criteria is applied to, they extend to contracts above the value of £100,000, which is the Forces and PCC's formal tender threshold. So that sub-threshold, lower value, locally sourced spend, we don't apply to, because it would just not necessarily be relevant to have that criteria in there. It's the formal contracts that the force let on behalf of the Commissioner. And that's based on the consultation that we embarked on at the outset when contracting with the social value portal, and their experience of having rolled this out to various other public bodies and so on. In terms of the question about the 10% attributed to social value in our evaluation criteria, it is something that we have consciously committed to taking stock of once we've gone through a full cycle of our tendering, and we're about 1.5 years into using the portal in earnest now. And when one thinks that most contracts are on a 3-year tendering cycle, we're kind of at the point now where we're starting to see some meaningful information and intel as to whether that 10% is having a sufficient impact on our contract awards. To this point, it has borne out to be actually quite the determinant factor of suppliers that the force has made agreements with, but I do take on board the notion that could well be subject to review, and we may benefit from increasing that threshold, and very much would welcome engaging with you good self and Tom and others from the office just to explore that, because I do think it's a valid change.
Okay, thanks very much, Lee.
Okay, Tom, do you want to come in?
Thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner. First, just want to quickly say once again how good it has been to see West Midlands Police take on that social value criteria and actually bringing something tangible to your procurement process. So it's not just some vague commitment, it's something you actually see suppliers offer, and then you follow up on it. So that's really good. We'll keep working with you on that. My question is brief. What is West Midlands Police's strategy to reduce their carbon emissions over the medium and the long term?
Lee?
Commissioner, if I come in to start with, then Lee might have some detail issues. So we have done some work on carbon neutrality in the force. I mean this in the nicest sense. It's probably been quite tactical, the stuff we've done. And as part of This Work strategy plan this year, actually one of the limbs is to come up with a sustainability strategy for the force that's more clearly set out, that we'd want to work through with the Commissioner as well. So, I think Lee may touch on some of the stuff we've already achieved. If there are, we have done some stuff in terms of reducing the carbon footprint, particularly through things like the estate programme. We were at the forefront of areas around electric vehicles early on, but we're probably not making the pace that I think we would expect, as an organisation, and probably what our new staff would expect a socially responsible organisation to do. So it is one specific limb in the This Work Matters strategy.
Lee, is there something more you want to come in?
The only thing I would add over and above the Chief's overview there is that, recognising that we had a fairly tactical, reactive approach to this work to this point, as part of embedding this as a priority under the new strategy, the force under Neil Chamberlain's Commercial Services Directorate has recently recruited an energy lead for the organisation, and they're due to start in October, late September, early October time, and they will be tasked with bringing this together in a cohesive, strategic fashion. So it'd be perhaps useful for us to provide a more detailed, comprehensive update at that point, clearly outlining our intended approach.
Okay, great, thank you. We have a session very soon about going into the detail about the potential strategy going forward. So I look forward to that. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you, Lee. I know you've been tested by the technology, but thank you for holding in on that. West Midlands is a region that is going to potentially have a significant impact in terms of economic downturn that we are facing through this pandemic. And I'm very pleased that we are buying more and more products locally to support jobs in the West Midlands. We put £46 million back into the local economy last year as a result of provisions we have put into contracts. And 150 apprenticeships have been taken up and over 1,000 jobs have been created or protected. So it's a great example of a public sector institution supporting the local economy, and hopefully that will alleviate some of the economic challenges that we're going to be facing as we move forward through the COVID issues. Okay, so on that point, I will move on to the next agenda item, which is Commonwealth Games. Is that, Chief Constable, is that yourself? You're going to be presenting?
So I think because we're running ahead, I'm hoping Dave will catch up in terms of Commonwealth Games. So I'll start us off on Commonwealth Games. If you just lift to the paper 1 second. So I suppose key issues in relation to this. I think we celebrated a few weeks ago 2 years out to the Games in the West Midlands. It's a very significant part of the work the force is doing, as you can imagine. It is one of the largest multi-sport global events that takes place, and the events in Birmingham, I think, will be significant to that regard. Also, the force is very keen to ensure it hooks into legacy, but largely the paper will touch on the main areas the force has to do to deliver what is a considerable public safety and security operation that we do at the moment. The force is kind of well advanced in terms of its team. The planning arrangements are fully funded as part of this work, so it's important to reassure the public that while we of course have got talented staff from West Midlands Police in this area, we are increasing the establishment of the force to cater for the number of people we need. And the team are working as part of the organising committee located across 2 sites. We're currently at about 31 staff, but that number will grow closer to about 90 by the time games take place. As probably people are aware, the majority of the Games venues are within the West Midlands Police Force area. The only exceptions are that the Olympic Velodrome in London will be used for the cycling. There will be an event at Cannock Chase for mountain biking, and also at Leamington Spa, the bowls will be taking place there as well. And while venues still tend to move around to a degree, and the work's ongoing, that is starting to lock down now with 2 years out. In terms of our planning arrangements and structures, then it's probably just worth talking through that actually that we are planning at a national threat level of substantial for the UK during this, which is where the country sits. We will not plan for a critical level or budget for a critical level of threat, because we know that would then require an entire national response, and government have been very clear that if the threat level rose to critical during the Commonwealth Games, they would step in and support that work, and are not expecting us to budget that. There is a threat level of moderate Commonwealth Games that's assessed, and that's done as a result of work we do with the Joint Threat Assessment Centre nationally. That threat will continue to be updated throughout Games, but as you can see, there are a number of threats that we're looking to try and manage around this. Every time one of these events comes forward, the type of threats that might be faced vary. So over the last few years, for example, we've seen things like drones become an increased security risk, and our plan will take that into account. But probably one of the major areas we are looking at very substantially with the organising committee is cyber attack and denial of service, which has become a stronger feature of major sporting events. There is a national security board that takes place to moderate the work that's done by UK government and West Midlands Police and other partners to ensure we're working together effectively to be in a position to respond. And that follows the type of governance that we've seen across other events, and West Midlands Police is well organised in terms of its involvement in that. In terms of the budget, we have been doing some work. The budget has come down considerably. It's important for me to say at this stage, our job is to make sure that there is a proportionate level of security for games, that it's adequately protected, but we also need to make sure that actually that security budget is well used. One of the challenges these events face globally is the security costs have risen considerably since 9/11, and they are getting to the point where the costs of security and other associated activity can become an economic hindrance and deterrence to major cities hosting these events. So we continue to go through a series of reviews of our budget, which has stood up very well so far. We have reduced the level of budget, and we are using a very sophisticated approach, a CRAM approach, which is a threat assessment approach we're doing with our organising committee colleagues as they're doing their venue operation planning, to make sure that actually our structures and our plans around security are in place. We've completed all of those CRAM assessments, bar 3 locations at the moment, and clearly the impact on the Games and Athletes Village has been substantially impacted upon this because of the decisions that have been made, and we'll be doing further assessments on those sites. I think final points to draw out for the force. You're aware that we're about to complete the build in 2021 of the Park Lane Operations Centre, which will be the place where we do command the Commonwealth Games operation. That site, I think, is a flagship indication of the way policing operations need to be managed in the future. So it's quite a significant building that will deliver far more than Commonwealth Games, and will integrate the way we deliver a number of operations in the force across a various range of sites, and reduce the need for some of our existing estate by combining in a state-of-the-art facility at the moment. So that will be kind of significant and exciting. And then I just think the final things in terms of volunteers and legacy, we do see volunteers being a key part of the security operation we deliver. We're already very committed to volunteering through things like Street Watch. My own experience of seeing volunteers in the Manchester Games as part of security shows they can bring considerable value, and we will look to mobilise around that. And we continue to work with the City Council and the organising committee to look at ways where we can ensure that legacy benefits are developed. We're very keen to see the community involvement and civic spirit driven up in the city and the region. It is a moment that should drive huge confidence in our region and the city of Birmingham. And we're working carefully now with the new legacy manager that's appointed by the organising committee. And again, I know the PCC's office will be engaging on that as well. So that's the overview in the paper. Brilliant timing for David to join us for questions, and we'll take any of the questions you've got around the work so far.
Thank you very much, and welcome, Chief Superintendent Dave Sturban. I will invite I'll invite Tom McNeill first to ask the question. Tom.
Thank you very much, Deputy. I know the Chief has already touched upon this, but I think Chief Super Dave Sturban was going to provide a bit more detail. If you could just outline a little bit more about what West Midlands Police might offer in terms of the volunteering strategy for the Games and the different aspects to it.
So there are a number of strands to this. Can I just confirm everybody can hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Great. So a number of strands. We're obviously working very closely with the OC Director of Security in the security functional area. So within the private contract security side, there is a significant appetite to de-risk that strand, given what happened in the Olympics in 2012. And volunteering is a key component part of Nick Knight's mitigation really on the private contract security. So we think there is lots of potential there to use volunteers. We are talking to the SIA, the Security Industry Authority, around how that will work. And there are roles within the security operation that do not require an SIA accreditation badge that can be done by volunteers. So that is one strand of that work, and that is progressing really, really at some pace now. Last week, we did a deep dive with Home Office and DCMS into the private contract security around how they are going to de-risk that issue. And Nick and his team, with my support, gave a presentation to central government around that. And that included an update on how the volunteering strand is progressing. We're looking at using the local voluntary sector. The armed services are really interested in joining that, particularly for veterans and also colleagues in the armed services who are resettling. There's a huge turnover in the armed services, and up to 3,000 per annum turnover of armed service colleagues that are coming out into civilian life. And we're looking at the potential to use essentially duty time military staff who are retiring or service leaving to come on board and assist us with the games. There's also links into various charities, service related as well, that could provide us with volunteers. So that's one part of it. In terms of the West Midlands Police side, we're clearly keen to involve our Active Citizens programme. We will clearly have a significant deployment of special constables and use our cadets. We're talking to the National Special Constabulary to try and leverage some mutual aid as well in from special constables around the other forces. That essentially two-pronged approach on volunteering. There's the OC security side, which we're supporting, and there's the internal WMP side, where we're going to look to mobilise communities locally. All of that's been overseen in my programme within the sort of community engagement strand led by Lisa Robson, one of my chief inspectors. So lots going on in that space. And if this forum wanted a more detailed presentation on that further down the line, I'll be more than happy to give it.
Thank you. I think Tom wants to come back in.
Okay, thank you. That was really comprehensive and really helpful. Just one quick additional point. It is part of the strategy also going to be about how we can recruit volunteers from certain groups and communities that aren't always attracted to the police, potentially to create a long-term recruitment legacy?
I think there will be lots of opportunities in that space, Tom, and we've had some very helpful discussions now with Nicola Turner, the new Director of Legacy, who I know is due to meet with you good selves imminently now. I'm going to join that meeting. I've joined Nicola's governance on the steering group as the force representative to dock into that work. We're going to have a further meeting with Helen Kershaw from the Combined Authority as well to look how my community engagement strand can dock into the OC legacy work, particularly around volunteers, particularly getting into some of our harder to reach communities in the inner city to try and maximise the opportunities there. I think the OC are estimating, from talking to Nicola, the OC are estimating, just looking back on my notes, that the Games is going to generate up to 40,000 opportunities for jobs and volunteering, 40,000 jobs and volunteering in totality, if you include construction right the way through to services provided during Games times and the pool of volunteers that will support the Games. So that's a massive opportunity for us. So we've got a further meeting with Helen Kershaw, who is employed by the Combined Authority but is working within the OC Legacy Directorate, which is a small directorate currently of 4 people. We've got a meeting scheduled with Helen, with West Midlands Fire Service joining us on that as well, because they're really interested in trying to get some legacy benefits out of this. We're going to get very close to Nicola's team to drive that work forward.
Thank you very much. I'll invite Jonathan to come in next.
Thank you, Chair. There have been some announcements of late, Dave, relating to the Games, and notably the new sites for some of the sporting events, and also the decision to take a different approach to provision of accommodation for athletes, and the announcement that there won't be a sort of bespoke athletes village. Do any of these decisions have any particular implications for the policing operation or the wider security operation associated with the Games?
We've been expecting the decision, obviously, around the village, which is clearly a massive decision for the programme, with its political sensitivities as well. We knew that decision was coming, so we've had the luxury of some time and space to look at Plan Bs. In terms of the villages, what we're looking at, and we've done quite a lot of work on this already with our OC colleagues. So you've got University of Birmingham student accommodation. The same again at Warwick University, and some of the hotels within what will be the red line, the perimeter of the venue at the NEC. In addition to that, of course, you've got one hotel location in London for the Velo Park cycling. So we've been working on this now for probably about 3 months, scoping those contingencies, conscious that a decision was going to come through around the main village site. So we've done lots of work on that. Broadly at the moment, it's about cost neutral in terms of our plan. So rather than having that one big site at Perry Bar, we've obviously got 3 main satellite villages now. It places a bigger role on Warwickshire Police as well. So they are involved in our planning around the Warwickshire campus, and we're going into their force executive next month to give them a full briefing, because as well as that additional venue essentially now into the village, they've got 2 sporting events as well on Warwickshire, so their involvement is more significant than it was. So at the moment our projections are it's around cost neutral. It creates some challenges, obviously, having 3 sites rather than one main one in terms of staff deployments and rostering and so on. That said, it also creates some benefits around transport and security of transportation, because a lot of the athletes are now going to be more proximate to their sporting event venues and will have less far to travel. So in a security sense, that helps us as well. So hopefully that's answered your question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. A quick question before I bring in Gorinda. On paragraph 21, the venues, most of them are green. There's a couple at the bottom that are red. I'm assuming, is that because you don't know where they are going to be at the moment, hence the reason we can't do the CRAMA assessment? Other than that,
yeah.
Which is,
again, that table has changed since we submitted this for publication. We've obviously had, in terms of the Birmingham City Centre venue for the 3x3 basketball and volleyball, that's now confirmed as Smithfield. That one's green. Again, we've done the work on that. The cycle road racing, which is the first of the red columns at the bottom of that table, that is now in Warwick, with Warwick Racecourse being used to start finish. We're complete on that now in terms of the comparative risk assessment, so that's now green. So clearly, the only outstanding issues for us now in terms of those assessments are the village, and we've just discussed the very recent change in plan for that. So that's work in progress, and we still await an announcement on the location for the Games Family Hotel. So in summary, the vast majority of those comparative risk assessments have been done. They've been done in a very integrated way with our OC colleagues, supported by other subject matter experts. And I would suggest that just under 2 years out, to have the majority of that done in its first iteration is pretty good in a planning program sense. I'm more than happy that we are where we should be, given that there has been a lot of toing and froing and changes in decisions around venues and so on. And of course, we will spin through this process now probably another couple of times before we arrive at our final plan.
Thank you very much. Gorinda.
Thank you. Just pick up on the stuff about legacy. I understand what you say, that that's looking to be progressed in meeting very soon. But just to understand from your perspective, from West Midlands Police perspective, what does legacy look like? What are we looking for? What kind of opportunities are we looking to achieve from that? And secondly, there's been some comment recently about how at the senior level, both governance and operationally, the people running the Commonwealth Games planning do not reflect the diversity of the West Midlands. What can we do? What can in terms of into it to help with rest on that?
Okay, so I'll deal with the first half of your question first. In terms of the approach to legacy, I think there are 2 sides to that. So there is the internal legacy that, as the programme director, I need to leave behind when this work is completed. So that is about our staff being upskilled. We have a plan to deliver a number of additional specialist trained staff, and I'll use the example of security coordinators. So they are the people that do the assessments around venues and locations that enable people like me as police commanders to make decisions on the final tactical plans, informed by that recognised subject matter expertise. We are training 12 of those addition. If I think back to late 2008, 2009, the force had 1 security coordinator when we first started getting into the world of hosting party conferences. Here we are now, 12 years later, and we've got a healthy cadre of around 20, or we will have around 20 fully trained security coordinators. That's a nationally recognised qualification. These people can work within West Midlands, but they can also work in other jurisdictions, in other forces, and support other forces. And part of the programme to get those people trained and accredited will involve farming them out for short periods to look at other major events in the Metropolitan Police area. We're working with Police Scotland and others in this regard to get those people skilled up. And of course, our capacity as a force then to deal with major events, and clearly with the background terrorist threat enduring, it's really important work that we apply that expertise to all events in the force area. And there's now a triage process in force that ensures that all events get some scrutiny from a security coordination perspective. So that's just one example of a skill set that's uplifting to support Commonwealth Games that will leave a legacy. You've then got the stuff that the Chief alluded to around the capital investment in the event control suite and a major new state-of-the-art command and control platform for the force, which will clearly endure for many years beyond the Commonwealth Games. So another example there of that sort of internal legacy. There is the broader sort of involvement and upskilling across the planning functions linked to what I described around the SECO. And then, of course, we've got our community engagement and the legacy there. And going back to that broader discussion we had a few moments ago, you know, the real opportunity there in let's face it, some fairly bleak economic circumstances we find ourselves at the moment with COVID and all of the aftermath of that, to have that opportunity to create jobs, to get community groups, particularly young people involved, a massive opportunity for us. Again, going into some of the detail of that, Nicola will want to talk to the PCC around finance, because she is unashamedly going around the partnership looking to secure funds to support the legacy work from the major partners. But there are issues such as a Jobs and Skills Academy. There are going to be a series of community projects. I think there are 10 £50,000 community projects that are looking at social action assignments within the areas. So there's lots and lots of work going on there where we see a great opportunity to dock into all of that. I think I see our role very much as helping to facilitate that work. I've invested on my team quite heavily in the community engagement side so that we can do what we're good at, actually, in neighbourhood policing, and that is, you know, help to mobilise communities to get involved in this work to access these potential legacy benefits. So that's the sort of approach I'm taking with this, if that helps.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that really comprehensive feed update. Any other questions? Grundy, you want to come back?
Yeah, just the second part of the question about governance arrangements and not representing the diversity of the West Midlands.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So we're doing a lot on diversity and inclusion.
About the team, there's just a couple of bits I'll make on this one.
Yeah, certainly. So we've got a programme. We're recruiting. It'll be nearly 100 people by the time we've finished. We're just in phase 3 of our recruitment at the moment. So my team is currently just over 30 strong. We're currently in the middle of a recruitment process. We've worked very closely with the Diversity and Inclusion Unit to make sure that our approach to this maximises the opportunity. We've got staff networks involved in helping and assisting candidates prepare for that process. We've done a series of roadshows to that effect to help brief and prepare candidates to work towards a job on the Commonwealth Games team. The early evidence from that, and I'll be in a better position in the autumn to speak with more authority on this, but the early evidence on this is that it is feeding through directly into some better representation within the team. And, you know, I speak as a white male chief superintendent with 28 years service steering this. So this is really important work. My team does need to more reflect the communities that we serve. We're on the latest recruitment, we're over 1/3 BAME colleague applications. That's including some external candidates as well, where we've advertised externally. And the early evidence is, I've had an update this morning actually that we've had 2 successes for one post where we've got 2 female BAME candidates who succeeded in getting jobs on the Games just this morning. So that approach seems to be gleaning some benefits, and we're determined, working with the Staff Association, staff networks and the D&I unit, to continue to deliver on that. If I can make my team more reflective of the communities, I think that's part of the bigger picture for the force, linked to the officer uplift that's going on. And again, this is a huge opportunity to get better in diversity and inclusion. So that's what we're doing.
So if I just add on the back of the points Dave's made, I would commend the work Dave and team have done around this. It's been at the forefront of the assembly, the planning team, that we're more representative for a number of reasons. One is we would recognise that some of the skill sets that we need to deliver games when we started the team were were largely drawn from our operations department, and actually that's in some of those areas is not the most representative part of the force. We've made a decision to prioritise the games roles because we can't carry out positive action across every role in West Midlands Police, at any one time to the same degree. But we know there's a lot of excitement in the force around games, and a lot of people would traditionally not be able to access some of the roles. So the approach Dave has taken a very long line of sight view to testing to selecting people off the right attitude, approach, and potential on many occasions, not just the fact they've got the tick in the box. So the SECOs is a great example. There's a lead-in time to train people. So it's actually, I think, I'm hoping that as the results progress through, they continue the good work. But I think the approach Dave's taken is a really long-term view. We are recruiting people for jobs in 2 years. So we've got some time to take a different approach to recruitment. And so it's a much more strategic approach. I think also just in terms of senior representation, Matt Ward will take over this work from Chris Johnson in terms of representation. I know Matt, as a long invested member of the community here in the West Midlands, I think that's really good news as well for senior representation at the Games.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. It's good to know that you're taking a chance and actually making opportunities available for people from across the VME background. It's very important to make a statement, especially on these games in the most diverse city in Europe, that at least the policing side of it, we're doing everything we can to ensure that the team is diverse and reflects the community. Is there any other questions? If not, then thank you very much.
One other point just before Dave leaves us, Wahid, and I think the papers from the force today have been very good, but I would just emphasise this one. I think that Dave makes this work look very easy, and he is right to say we are in a very good position 2 years out. That is through no small effort on his and his team's part. The level and quality of work is, I think, very impressive. Where we are at this stage, there's no room for complacency. There's a hell of a lot to do still. But I do think I would just kind of draw out this occasion the great work Dave and team have been doing.
Thank you, and I'd like to emphasise that. Sorry, Green, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think I asked a question about diversity, and actually the answer I got back, I was quite pleased with to have that kind of outlook looking forward. Is exactly the approach we want. We know that this isn't an instant fix on these issues, and we know that there are some deep-seated and long-standing things that we've got to turn around, and to have that approach is exactly the right approach. So I'm quite pleased with that, and when you've got some data available, please do bring it to us. Thank you.
I hope this will be part of the update in the next report that we get to the board. But let me also reiterate what the Chief Constable said to some of the Dave Stern. Please do pass on our thanks to you and to the team as well. This is, as you said, one of the major games in Europe, and some of the planning is very complex, I'm sure, and taking all the different moving parts and bringing them together is always a challenge. So thank you for that. Just to wrap up this agenda item, I know there's 3,000 officers, including a significant portion from other forces, will be required as part of the security operation of the game. I'm very pleased that planning is well underway, on budget and on track to ensure a safe game in 2022. To support those officers and military personnel, we'll also be looking to recruit thousands of volunteers to help during the games and hopefully beyond too as well. So thank you for that. On that point, I will move on then to the next agenda item, which is the Chief Constable's update. Chief Constable.
Yes, so thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I'll be fairly brief today, and I'll probably reiterate a point we've made. So I did want to touch particularly just on the large gatherings operation reliant work that we're doing under the COVID regulations specifically. You just kind of set out a little bit more what the force's intent is around those. So the first thing I'd start off by saying, and I think I've repeatedly said since the pandemic began, with the lockdown restrictions that we started to see in March was that it would be the public of the West Midlands who enforced this legislation, who followed it. And actually, the public remain, I think, outstanding in the work they're doing. There are real attempts by people to make sure they have modified the way they live, the way their relationships are operating, the way they socialise and work. Particularly the level of uptake on face masks, I think we would all recognise has generally been very high. Of course, the irritation that sometimes causes when we see people who don't comply with the rules can be magnified given the level of sacrifice people are taking, and we recognise that. But I think we should always start these conversations by recognising the majority of people are doing an outstanding job and doing a very good job, and it's important to keep that level of vigilance. In the force, we have done all the work others have done to make our environments COVID secure, but the same point we are making to our own staff is not to relax, not to become complacent, particularly as we enter into this autumnal period. It's very important we keep up the good work. I do think the COVID restrictions are particularly difficult for the elderly, the vulnerable, and for young people. And it is young people, I think, where the tension is around the large social gatherings. So this weekend, the force dealt with 80 of those. We are delivering a specific operation. Why are we doing this? Well, of course, we're doing it because of the risk of the pandemic and infection, and we want to minimise gatherings. That's why they are restricted. But I'd also appeal to young people and parents, guardians, and other members of the community to recognise that large unlicensed gatherings are dangerous. The reason we have a strong licensing regime about events in this country, the reason we have a licensing regime around licensed premises, is to ensure the public are safe when they're entertaining and enjoying themselves. And I'm afraid the gatherings that we're seeing are not only dangerous in terms of COVID infection, but are dangerous to young people. And we've seen that by the desire to have these events is driven by a desire sometimes to sell controlled drugs. It's driven by a desire for people to come together clearly, but we've also seen people go to these events where weapons have been used. And particularly we saw some high profile cases where firearms have been discharged. And that's not just a case unique to the West Midlands. Sadly, people will have seen a very tragic incident that was investigated in Greater Manchester that led to 2 people being killed. So really what I'm saying, I think, to young people and particularly to parents is, at these weekend events, you have a responsibility to make sure that you or your young person you have care for are not going to these events, because they are very, very dangerous. In terms of the work the force is doing, I'd commend the efforts over the last few weeks. These events have caused considerable frustration to the public who observe them. They are on occasions very angry with the police for not breaking them up, but the scale and numbers we're dealing with are huge, and as a result, we are prioritising the ones we're targeting because of their harmful nature. We are deploying a considerable number of staff together because it requires a large number of officers to safely break up these events. And I think the public should be very clear on our resolve from the footage that we released recently from drones and for the type of events we're intervening in. The approach of the police still remains to engage with people, to educate, encourage them to follow the legislation, and enforce as last resort. However, what I would say is, where people are setting about to organise events of this type, my view is that we do not need to consider engage, educate and encourage. By this stage, it is a deliberate attempt to circumvent the legislation. And as you've already identified in the meeting, the government, thankfully, is responding to the points that have been made by myself and other chiefs of the need for more serious legislation that properly deters people. At the moment, the DJ who sets up an event under COVID legislation is liable to receive the same amount of punishment and fine as somebody who fails to wear a face mask in the shop, and that can't be the right balance. And so an increase in powers hopefully will deliver a level of deterrent, and we hope to see those come in, and I hope they can come in before this weekend. But the force will be out continuing to enforce this, and I ask for the cooperation of the public, because actually the risk is not just around COVID, it is a broader level of danger to young people around these types of unlicensed and unregulated events. The final thing I would say, just in terms of the work that's ongoing in the force at the moment, is just a big thank you to the staff of the force. It is a normal summer in many ways. The level of demand the force is receiving is significant, and the work we're doing on COVID is on top of that. So you've seen this weekend, we ran Section 60 operations with armed officers in parts of Birmingham to deter gang violence around particular challenges that we know have been taking place in that area. We've run large operations to do with COVID parties, but at the same time, we're still delivering a response to members of the public who are phoning us at the usual high volumes we see in the summer. And of course, more so, many of these cases now are around issues of domestic violence and vulnerability. So there is a huge pressure here. At the same time, as Jane has said, we've got people self-isolating, and inevitably, it's really important we give some staff time off to take annual leave and breaks. So people are working incredibly hard in the force at the moment to support the public. And what I would say to the public is, please do be patient with us when you make phone calls to us over weekends and in evenings. We are incredibly busy at the moment with the demands we're receiving. Please do remember the online service we offer is very good. People rate it very highly when they use it. It usually is able to answer their queries in a very convenient way to you, but actually it's an easier way for us to deal with this. So please be patient. And for those people who are in need, don't hesitate where you are under threat and need. You must phone us and let us know. We are absolutely trying to meet this need to deal with the serious and problematic issues, as well as deal with the most vulnerable in our society at this stage. So a very demanding time for policing, but one the force is rising to. And as always, we just emphasise the thanks that I offer to staff in the force for their great work.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable, and let me reiterate your point as well. It is a challenging period like any other, as you said, the summer demand is very similar to last year's summer demand, with the added pressures of COVID as well, and to re-emphasise the points of the public and hopefully supporting the police where they can. And ensuring that they are complying with the regulations and ensuring that young people don't attend these events that they are attending as well. So thank you for that. On that point, I'll just move to the last agenda item, which is the work plan. Chief Executive, is there anything specific you would like to mention on the plan?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing specific, sir. The work plan now goes back to its usual cycle of reflecting the priorities and in the existing police and crime plan, as well as the additional chapter that we published earlier this year. We are keeping under review the extent to which we want to keep reporting on a monthly basis in relation to the emergency chapter, and I'll take my guidance obviously from yourself and from the Commissioner in that regard. The work plan now relates right out to the end of the term of office, and it's just simply there for noting, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay. In that point, then, alas, we must come to an end, as they say, and it's been a very thorough and excellent meeting as well. Although we very much miss the Commissioner, but we have continued in his absence with a high level of questioning and support as well. So again, thank you, Chief Constable, and thank you to all your staff for putting a lot of effort and all goes into writing the reports, and a very comprehensive reports and question and answers. And just to reiterate also a thanks to all the officers who and staff who are working throughout this period as well. So the next meeting is on the 15th of September, and I formally declare the meeting closed. Thank you.